Welcome to the Space and Astronomy Podcast.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, of course. So, I want you to imagine reaching out and just like touching the wall next to you right now.
Okay.
You feel its solid texture.
Huh?
You sense its depth, its temperature, its physical reality.
Right, it feels completely real.
Exactly. But now, imagine realizing that every single atom you are touching, every ounce of depth you perceive, in fact, the entirety of the three-dimensional universe you live in is actually just a two-dimensional projection.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around.
It really is. Like this breathtakingly complex illusion just encoded on a distant, flat, cosmic boundary, and it's projecting inward to create the reality you're experiencing right now.
It sounds like pure science fiction.
It totally does. But today, we are unpacking the holographic universe theory.
And we're doing it in a pretty unique way today.
Yes, we are. We're looking at a fascinating piece of source material titled The Holographic Universe, a dialogue of belief and skepticism. And, just to be clear right off the bat, our deep dive today isn't just about crunching the mathematical equations of astrophysics.
Right, we're not just doing math on air.
Thank goodness.
Okay.
No, we are examining how we approach and debate and process these mind-bending scientific concepts when they threaten to basically shatter our fundamental understanding of reality.
Yeah, and the material we were looking at doesn't just present the physics, it presents a framework for human cognition.
How so?
Well, it takes this reality-breaking theory and uses it as a battleground for two distinct archetypal voices engaged in a dialogue.
Ah, right, the two voices.
Exactly. The text identifies them simply as the believer and the skeptic.
I love that setup.
It's great. By analyzing how these two contrasting perspectives interact with a concept that completely defies common sense, we're getting this masterclass in the philosophy of science.
Yeah, we get to see the friction between the human instinct to, imagine the impossible and the rigorous demand to prove the tangible. Okay, let's unpack this.
All right.
Because the moment I started reading through the source material, I couldn't help but turn the mirror on myself.
Oh, absolutely. Same here.
And I want you, the listener, to do exactly the same thing right now. Think about how you personally react when you're confronted with an unbelievable reality-altering theory.
It's a great exercise.
When a theoretical physicist tells you the universe might just be a complex projection, what is your immediate visceral reaction?
Do you lean into the wonder of it?
Right. Do you let your imagination just run wild with the sheer, terrifying scale of those possibilities?
Or do you immediately put up your hands, narrow your eyes, and, demand to see the mathematical proof?
Yeah, because we all have a default setting, right?
We do. And identifying that default setting is the crucial first step in understanding how we process new information. My goal in this deep dive is to help us understand why this specific dual perspective framework, putting the believer and the skeptic in the exact same room to wrestle with the same impossible idea, is such a powerful method for unpacking complex truths.
Because neither archetype can really survive on their own, can they?
No, not at all. As we will see, neither archetype can successfully navigate a paradigm-shifting concept entirely by themselves. The history of scientific revolution proves they absolutely require each other.
And we're going to map out exactly how that dynamic works today.
Sounds good.
We'll start by plunging into the deep end of the holographic universe theory itself as the battleground, right?
Yes, establishing why it serves as the ultimate intellectual stress test.
Then we'll dissect the psychology of the believer, exploring why open-minded wonder is actually a really sophisticated cognitive strategy.
And then we'll pivot to the absolute rigor of the skeptic.
Right, examining why their relentless demand for evidence is the anchor that prevents science from just devolving into fiction.
And ultimately, we're going to uncover what happens when these two forces collide.
So let's step right into the arena.
Yeah, let's do it. To understand the dialogue, we first have to understand the gravity of the arena itself. The source text explicitly centers around the holographic universe theory.
But it frames this not as a settled scientific law, right?
Exactly. It isn't classical mechanics or thermodynamics. It is a frontier concept.
And a frontier concept inherently sits right on the bleeding edge of human comprehension.
Yeah, it hasn't been definitively proven, but the mathematical framework suggests it could actually be the true nature of reality.
Which is wild.
It is. And to understand why it invites such intense belief and skepticism, we have to look at the actual physics that kind of forced this idea into existence.
It started with a crisis, didn't it?
A massive crisis. The black hole information paradox.
Right. Because physicists didn't just wake up one day and decide to invent a holographic reality for fun.
No, they were backed into a corner by their own math.
Okay, lay out the crisis for us.
So, for decades, physics has been built on two incredibly successful but fundamentally incompatible pillars.
The big stuff and the small stuff.
Basically, yeah. On one side, you have Albert Einstein's general relativity, which beautifully describes gravity and the macro universe, so planets, stars, galaxies.
And then on the other side?
On the other side, you have quantum mechanics, which perfectly describes the micro universe, subatomic particles, atoms, forces.
But they don't play nice together.
They absolutely hate each other. The problem is, when you try to combine the math of both theories to describe something that is both incredibly massive and incredibly tiny, like the singularity at the center of a black hole, the equations literally just blow up.
They give you infinities, right?
Yes, they completely stop making sense.
And this crisis really escalated with Stephen Hawking, didn't it? When he introduced Hawking radiation.
It really did. In the 1970s, Stephen Hawking realized that black holes aren't entirely black.
Which was a huge shock.
Massive. Thanks to quantum fluctuations near the event horizon, the point of no return, black holes slowly leak radiation over trillions of years.
And eventually they just evaporate completely and disappear.
Yes. But this created a catastrophic problem for the foundation of physics.
Because of the information rule.
Exactly. Quantum mechanics dictates that information cannot be destroyed. Like, if you throw an encyclopedia into a fire, the information isn't technically gone.
It's just scrambled, right, into ash and smoke and heat.
Right. With a perfect supercomputer, you could theoretically reconstruct it.
Okay, but with a black hole.
With a black hole, Hawking argued that when it evaporates, the information about whatever fell into it, whether it was a star or an encyclopedia or a spaceship, is permanently deleted from the universe.
Which violates the most sacred rule of quantum physics.
It completely breaks the law of conservation of information.
Whoa.
Yeah, and this paradox sparked a legendary scientific war, primarily between Stephen Hawking and a physicist named Leonard Susskind.
Because Susskind just refused to accept that information was deleted.
He absolutely refused. He spent years trying to mathematically rescue the universe from this paradox.
And his solution is what gives us the holographic principle, right?
Building on the work of Jacob Bekenstein and Gerard Hooft. Yes. Susskind proposed that the three-dimensional information of whatever falls into a black hole isn't lost inside the volume of the singularity.
Where does it go now?
It is mathematically plastered on the two-dimensional surface of the event horizon.
Like it's encoded there.
Exactly, encoded like a hologram.
So, wait, if I throw a three-dimensional apple into a black hole, the physical apple might be crushed, but the exact quantum data that makes up that apple is flattened and preserved on the boundary of the black hole.
You nailed it. And the Bekenstein bound proved that the amount of information a region of space can hold is proportional not to its three-dimensional volume, but to its two-dimensional surface area.
That is just... it breaks my brain a little bit.
Now take that concept and scale it up to the entire universe. In the late 1990s, physicist Juan Maldacena published a paper detailing the ADS-CFT correspondence.
And what did that prove?
It essentially proved that a mathematical description of a universe with gravity can be entirely equivalent to a mathematical description of a universe with one less dimension and no gravity.
So the three-dimensional reality we experience could mathematically just be a projection of data interacting on a two-dimensional boundary infinitely far away.
What's fascinating here is the sheer scale of the cognitive dissonance this creates.
Yeah, no kidding.
When you lay out the physics like that, it's undeniable that the math points toward this staggering conclusion. But the source text we are analyzing almost treats the theory itself as secondary to the human reaction it provokes.
Right, it acts as a mirror for human cognition.
Exactly. It forces our brains to confront the fact that our everyday sensory experience of reality might be completely decoupled from the actual underlying physics of the cosmos.
And that cognitive dissonance is exactly what the text is exploring.
Paradigm-shifting ideas disrupt the baseline heuristics our brains rely on to basically function efficiently.
Because for your entire life, your brain has relied on constants, right? Objects have volume, space has three dimensions, time flows linearly.
Right. And when a rigorous mathematically backed theory comes along and says the underlying architecture of all of that is an illusion, your brain is forced into a defensive corner.
it has to choose a coping mechanism.
Exactly. It can choose protective skepticism, rejecting the concept because it threatens a stable, functional model of reality.
Ooh.
Or it can choose expansive imagination, suspending the current model of reality to see where this terrifying new idea leads.
But I have to ask, why do we even entertain theories that are so vast they break our everyday understanding of reality?
That's a great question.
Is it human nature to just look for the most mind-blowing explanation? I mean, life is complicated enough without having to worry that my coffee cup is actually a localized projection of boundary mathematics.
Yeah, nobody wants to worry about their coffee cup being a hologram before they've had their coffee.
Exactly. Are we just bored with the mundane, so we invent these massive concepts to give ourselves existential vertigo?
It's not about seeking thrills or existential vertigo, I promise. We entertain these theories because the anomalies in our data demand it.
So we literally have no choice if we want the truth.
Exactly. If we only ever investigated things that fit neatly within our common sense understanding of reality, human knowledge would have stagnated in the Bronze Age.
That makes sense.
Common sense tells us the Earth is flat. Common sense tells us the sun revolves around us. Common sense tells us time ticks at the exact same rate for everyone everywhere.
And all of those common sense assumptions were shattered by people willing to entertain vast reality-breaking theories.
Right. We embrace the holographic principle because the standard model of physics is fundamentally incomplete and the map is screaming at us that a deeper, stranger reality exists.
I suppose processing the holographic universe theory is like being told the house you've lived in your whole life, the house you know every inch of, where you know which floorboards creak and how the light hits the kitchen at 8 a.m., is actually an incredibly elaborate, hyper-realistic movie set.
That's a perfect analogy.
Right. Like the plumbing doesn't actually go into the ground, it just loops behind a plywood wall.
Yeah.
If someone drops that on you, you're going to have one of two immediate extreme reactions. You either immediately start knocking on the walls, tearing up the floorboards, and looking for the hidden cameras in the scaffolding.
The skeptic reaction.
Exactly. Or you step back and just marvel at the incredible mind-boggling special effects, the sheer artistry, and the impossible scale of the production that managed to fool you for so long.
And the source text takes the person knocking on the walls looking for the scaffolding, and the person marveling at the special effects puts them in the exact same room, looking at the exact same wall, and asks them to talk it out.
And what a conversation they have.
It's incredible!
Now that we've established the arena, the dizzying, math-heavy reality of the holographic principle, let's look at how the first archetype in our source text handles it.
The believer.
Yes, the text introduces us to the believer. And the traits assigned to this voice are very deliberate. They're described as excited, open-minded, and someone who leans into the wonder.
Right.
And their foundational reaction to this terrifyingly vast theory is encapsulated in a single quote.
This actually makes sense if you think about it.
When you hear, "This actually makes sense if you think about it," it's crucial to understand that the believer is not claiming to have verified the math of the ADAS-CFT correspondence.
They haven't solved the equations.
No, not at all. What they are articulating is a powerful cognitive process. They are engaging in macro-level pattern matching. They are finding conceptual harmony.
Let's unpack the phrase leans into the wonder, because in modern hyper-empirical scientific discourse, wonder is often dismissed as a soft, unscientific emotion.
It really is. It sounds like something for poets, not physicists. Exactly. But in the context of tackling high-level, paradigm-shifting theories, wonder is doing heavy lifting.
Huge heavy lifting. Wonder is the psychological buffer that prevents immediate rejection of anomalous data.
How does that work cognitively?
Well, in cognitive psychology, there is a concept related to cognitive flexibility, the ability to adapt our thinking to new, unexpected conditions. When we lack wonder, our brains default to rigid, algorithmic processing.
So if the data doesn't fit the algorithm, it gets thrown out.
Precisely. If new data contradicts the existing algorithm, the data is discarded as an error. But wonder allows the human mind to temporarily suspend disbelief long enough to entertain a massive, unconventional idea.
It says, okay, this goes against everything my senses tell me, but I'm going to hold this concept in my mind without destroying it, just to trace its outline.
Exactly. The believer uses wonder as a deliberate tool to explore the perimeter of a new idea before the hard evidence has been fully constructed.
It gives the idea breathing room. So when the believer says, "This actually makes sense if you think about it," it feels like they're employing an intuitive logic.
They are synthesizing abstract concepts like the conservation of information and the nature of black holes and finding a philosophical elegance that resonates on a gut level.
It's almost like a Gestalt realization, where the brain suddenly perceives the whole picture before analyzing the individual brushstrokes.
Gestalt realization is the perfect framework for this. The believer is looking at the history of physics, from Newton to Einstein to quantum mechanics, and seeing a trajectory.
A trajectory toward what?
Well, physics has consistently moved away from intuitive, mechanical explanations toward increasingly abstract, mathematical, and information-based reality. So the believer looks at the holographic principle and thinks, of course, reality is fundamentally made of information rather than solid matter. That is exactly the direction the universe has been pointing us.
They haven't validated the microscale mechanisms, but the macroscale symmetry feels profoundly correct to them.
Right.
I think about all the major scientific breakthroughs in history, and it seems like every single one required someone to adopt this exact believer mindset first.
No, absolutely.
Long before the tools existed to prove anything, someone had to lean into the wonder. Take Albert Einstein. His theory of special relativity didn't start in a laboratory with lasers and atomic clocks.
No, it started with a teenager daydreaming.
Right. Leaning into the wonder of a thought experiment. He imagined what it would look like if he could run alongside a beam of light or ride on it.
He used intuitive logic to realize that if the speed of light is constant, then time and space must be flexible.
Which is absolutely absurd on its face.
Totally absurd.
Yeah.
But he looked at the absolute absurdity of time dilation and effectively said, this actually makes sense if you think about it.
And the history of science is effectively a history of believers proposing intuitive leaps that skeptics later build the tools to test, right?
That's a great way to put it. Look at Copernicus. He looked at the chaotic, overly complex math required to explain the retrograde motion of the planets with Earth at the center.
It was a mess of a model.
A total mess. But he realized that putting the sun at the center made the geometry beautiful and elegant. It made sense.
Even though the telescope to actually prove the phases of Venus didn't exist until Galileo built it decades later.
Exactly. The believer is the scout who ventures out ahead of the main army of empirical data. They map the territory of what might be possible.
You know, it reminds me of those classic magic eye posters.
Oh yeah, the autostereograms from the 90s.
Yes, you're standing there, staring at this chaotic, repeating pattern of neon static.
And if you stare at it exactly as it is, focusing hard on the surface data with rigid analytical focus, you will only ever see static.
Right. But the believer is the person who is willing to relax their eyes, blur their vision slightly, and trust that a three-dimensional image is going to emerge from the noise.
They deliberately relax their cognitive grip on conventional surface-level reality to allow the deeper pattern to take shape in their mind.
They trust the process of intuitive realization.
That analogy highlights the specific mechanism at play perfectly. To see the magic eye image, you literally have to diverge your ocular focus. You have to stop looking at the ink on the paper.
And the believer, looking at the holographic universe, is diverging their intellectual focus.
Yes, they are looking past the solid wood of the table and the ticking of the clock and allowing their brain to process the deeper mathematical symmetry.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because there is a very fine but incredibly important line here.
Okay, what is it?
Being open-minded in this way, relaxing your focus to see the bigger picture, is not the same thing as being gullible.
Absolutely not.
The believer in our source text isn't a mark falling for a psychic's cold reading. It is a deliberate, active intellectual stance.
They are choosing to walk down an unlit path to see where it goes, but they are keeping their wits about them.
The distinction between cognitive flexibility and sheer gullibility is paramount, isn't it?
It is. Gullibility is the uncritical acceptance of information due to a lack of processing power or analytical tools. It's accepting a claim because you lack the ability to question it.
But the believer's openness is different.
The believer's openness is an active processing mechanism. They are holding the concept, rotating it in their mind, and seeing how it aligns with other abstract concepts.
But to your point about the unlit path, walking down that path fueled solely by wonder is dangerous.
Very dangerous. Wonder is a fantastic engine for generating hypotheses, but wonder without an anchor drifts effortlessly into pseudoscience, confirmation bias, and fantasy.
Because our brains are almost too good at pattern matching.
Exactly. The human brain is so good at pattern matching that it will often find patterns where none exist.
Which brings us to the necessary counterweight. The source text knows that the believer left unchecked will just float away into the ether.
So it brings in the other side.
Right, it immediately introduces the second archetype. Let's look at the skeptic.
The text defines the skeptic through traits that stand in stark contrast to the believer. The skeptic is grounded. They question everything.
And fundamentally, their defining characteristic is that they demand the evidence.
Yes. Their entire orientation toward the holographic universe theory is anchored by a single vital question. Okay, but how do we even test this?
Okay, but how do we even test this? It is the ultimate wet blanket.
It really is.
But it is the most necessary wet blanket in the history of human thought.
We really need to analyze the immense epistemological weight of the word test in that quote. It is the dividing line between philosophy and science.
Because of falsifiability, right.
Exactly. In the philosophy of science, particularly following the work of Karl Popper, a theory is only considered scientific if it is falsifiable.
Meaning there must be a specific experiment or observation you could conduct that would prove the theory wrong.
Right. If a theory is constructed in such a way that it can accommodate any possible observation, it isn't science, it's dogma.
So when the skeptic asks, how do we test this? They are demanding that the believer's beautiful, intuitive pattern submit itself to the brutal, unforgiving reality of falsifiability.
And the text specifically calls the skeptic grounded.
Which is so important when you are dealing with a theory like the holographic principle, which literally ungrounds you from physical reality by suggesting physical reality is a mirage.
Being grounded is an active form of intellectual resistance.
The skeptic serves as the intellectual gravity of the dialogue. They are the tether.
They ensure that the excitement of the elegant math doesn't outpace empirical, observable reality.
Intellectual gravity is the perfect framing. Just as gravity keeps us from floating off into the vacuum of space, the skeptic keeps the discourse tethered to the observable universe.
And it is vital to understand that this demand for evidence is not born of pessimism or a lack of imagination.
Because popular culture often portrays the skeptic as a cynic, right? Like a killjoy who lacks vision.
Yeah, but in reality, rigorous skepticism is the highest form of respect for the truth. The skeptic is effectively saying, the nature of reality is too important for us to just guess at it based on what feels mathematically elegant. We have to definitively prove it.
But let me ask you, this isn't the skeptic sometimes just a roadblock, though?
How do you mean?
Well, if we look back at the history we just discussed, if we constantly demand immediate, tangible evidence for things that are currently beyond our technological reach, do we stifle innovation?
It's a fair concern.
Like if a skeptic had been standing next to Democritus in ancient Greece when he first proposed the idea of atoms, the skeptic would have said, show me an atom. Oh, you can't. You don't have an electron microscope. Then your theory is useless.
And the idea could have died right there.
Exactly. Doesn't the skeptic's demand for immediate testing sometimes suffocate the believer's intuition before the technology has a chance to catch up?
That is a very common and understandable critique of hyperskepticism, but we have to look at what happens when the skeptic isn't there to act as a roadblock.
Okay, let's look at that.
History is littered with beautiful, intuitive, widely accepted theories that turned out to be completely dangerously wrong.
Like what?
For centuries, the brightest medical minds believed in the miasma theory of disease, the idea that diseases were caused by bad air.
Right, because it intuitively made sense. Swamps smelled bad and people near swamps got sick.
Exactly. It took relentless skepticism and the demand for testing eventually leading to the germ theory of disease to save millions of lives.
Wow, yeah.
Or look at the concept of the luminiferous ether in physics. Late 19th century physicists couldn't conceive of light waves traveling through an empty vacuum, so they intuitively deduced that the entire universe must be filled with an invisible, frictionless substance called the ether.
It made perfect sense. The math worked.
Until the Michelson-Morley experiment.
Oh, right.
Albert Michelson and Edward Morley designed an incredibly precise experiment to test the friction of the Earth moving through this ether. The skeptic demanded the test, and the test failed.
There was no ether.
None. It was a massive crisis, but that exact failure cleared the path for Einstein's theory of relativity.
So the skeptic didn't stifle innovation. The skeptic destroyed a false paradigm, so a true one could flourish.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the entire scientific method is built in the skeptic's image.
You formulate a hypothesis, and then you spend years trying to destroy your own idea.
The skeptic doesn't necessarily demand immediate proof today, but they demand a pathway to proof. They demand that the believer define what the bridge between theory and reality will actually look like.
It's the difference between a theoretical physicist and an experimental physicist.
Yes, perfectly said.
The believer is the theoretical physicist standing at a chalkboard covered in equations. They are mapping 11 dimensions in string theory and finding beautiful symmetries.
But the chalk doesn't affect reality.
Right. The skeptic is the experimental physicist who looks at that chalkboard and says, okay, to test this, we need to build a 27-kilometer subterranean tunnel beneath the border of France and Switzerland, supercool it with liquid helium, and smash protons together at 99.999% the speed of light.
The Large Hadron Collider.
Exactly. It took decades and billions of dollars to build. That is the skeptic doing the grueling, incredibly difficult work of grounding the believer's chalkboard math into physical reality.
That is a brilliant analogy. The believer draws the map, but the skeptic has to actually build the road through the mountains.
And you need both.
You really do. If you only have the theoretical physicist at the chalkboard, you have a beautiful philosophy that never impacts the real world.
And if you only have the experimental physicist building tunnels with no theoretical map, they're just digging holes in the dark for no reason.
Which brings us to the most vital part of the source text.
The dynamic between them.
Yes. We have the theoretical vision, and we have the experimental rigor. But the absolute magic of the dialogue described in this material isn't that these two archetypes are locked in a zero-sum deathmatch.
No. The magic is found in one specific sentence. The text says, both are genuinely trying to understand it together.
Genuinely trying to understand it together. That phrase recontextualizes everything we've discussed so far.
It explicitly states that this dynamic is not an adversarial debate.
Right. It is not a formalized intellectual joust where one side must be declared the victor and the other the loser.
It is a shared exploration of an unknown frontier.
And the distinction between debating to win and dialoguing to understand is basically the difference between ego and truth.
So true. When you watch a cable news debate, you are watching people debate to win.
Their primary goal is to defend a pre-existing ideological fortress. They listen to the other side only to find weak points to attack.
They are not genuinely trying to understand the other side's perspective. They are trying to dismantle it.
But when you are dialoguing to understand, the ego is removed.
Because the goal shifts from defending a fortress to mapping a new territory.
Exactly. In the context of the holographic universe, both the believer and the skeptic implicitly acknowledge a shared vulnerability. Neither of them possesses the absolute truth.
The believer knows their intuitive logic isn't a substitute for empirical data.
And the skeptic knows their demand for evidence isn't a substitute for a comprehensive framework.
So, by genuinely trying to understand it together, they are engaged in dialectical synthesis.
They are combining the thesis of imagination with the antithesis of rigor to reach a higher synthesis of knowledge.
But, this raises an important question for me.
Yeah.
If we look at this dynamic, this mutually beneficial, respectful synthesis of wonder and skepticism, it really highlights how utterly broken our modern discourse is.
This raises an important question indeed, because we don't do this anymore.
No, we self-segregate. The believers go to their forums and reinforce their wonder until it becomes cult-like delusion.
And the skeptics go to their forums and reinforce their rigor until it becomes rigid, cynical dogma.
And they just shout past each other from opposite sides of the canyon.
That fragmentation is the defining intellectual crisis of the information age. We have confused winning an argument with discovering the truth.
And the source text is basically presenting an antidote to that toxicity.
It shows us that true intellectual progress requires you to view the opposing archetype not as an enemy to be defeated, but as an essential sensory organ that you personally lack.
It's like two people trying to navigate out of a dense, terrifying forest in the pitch dark.
Oh, I like this.
One person has a heavy-duty tactical flashlight. That's our grounded skeptic. They have the beam aimed directly at the ground 3 feet in front of them.
They are illuminating the immediate observable data.
Right. They are making sure they don't step on a venomous snake, trip over an exposed root, or fall into a ravine. Their focus is narrow, empirical, and absolutely vital for immediate survival.
And the other person?
The other person, the open-minded believer, doesn't have a flashlight. They are looking up through the canopy of the stars. They are using celestial navigation, looking at the massive overarching constellations to figure out their general trajectory.
That is a perfect illustration of the complementary division of cognitive labor.
Because if the person with the flashlight refuses to look at the stars insisting that only what is immediately illuminated is real, they will walk perfectly safely, without ever tripping, in a massive circle until they die of exposure.
Right, and if the person looking at the stars refuses to look at the ground, insisting that only the macro trajectory matters, they will walk a perfectly straight line due north right off a 50-foot cliff.
They must collaborate. The flashlight illuminates the how we survive the next step, but the stars illuminate the where we are actually going.
And that level of collaboration requires profound intellectual humility.
Which is hard to find.
It is. The skeptic must humbly admit that their flashlight, no matter how bright, cannot illuminate the entire cosmos.
And the believer must humbly admit that knowing the position of the North Star won't prevent gravity from bringing their leg if they step into a hole.
When we apply this back to the holographic universe, the believer's assertion that this makes sense is the celestial navigation. They see the mathematical constellation of the ADAS-CFT correspondence.
And the skeptic's demand, how do we test this, is the flashlight, demanding a safe empirical step forward. I want to extrapolate this out because while the source text uses theoretical astrophysics as the arena, this dual-team approach is desperately needed everywhere.
Oh, everywhere.
Think about the overwhelming influx of information we face daily. A new artificial intelligence model drops, promising to either cure all diseases or end human civilization.
Right.
A new economic policy is proposed. A new medical breakthrough is announced. What if, instead of instantly panicking or instantly evangelizing, we consciously engage both of these internal archetypes simultaneously?
If we could internalize both the believer and the skeptic, we would achieve a state of informed equilibrium.
Informed equilibrium.
Yes. You allow yourself to lean into the wonder of the AI's capabilities, mapping out the incredible potential for human progress. But simultaneously, you deploy the skeptic to demand the evidence regarding data privacy, algorithmic bias, and security protocols.
This internal collaboration makes you incredibly resilient.
You become open enough to embrace genuine progress, but rigorous enough to be immune to grifters, scams, and corporate hype.
Informed equilibrium. That is the ideal state. And the source text points out that this collaborative dynamic doesn't just benefit the two people actively having the conversation.
No, it has a profound secondary effect.
The text specifically notes that this dialogue makes the listener feel like they're part of the conversation.
This brings us to the immersive pedagogy of the format. Why does listening to two people hash out a complex idea, one pulling with wonder, one pushing with doubt, feel so much more engaging than listening to a single monolithic expert deliver a lecture?
Yeah, if a single physicist stood at a podium and spent an hour just reading the Bekenstein-bound equations to prove the universe is a hologram, the audience would tune out in 5 minutes.
The audience would tune out because a single-voice lecture demands passive consumption. But the dual-host format, described in the text, engages the listener because it perfectly mirrors the listener's own internal cognitive architecture.
Because human beings are not monoliths.
Exactly. Every single person listening to a podcast about space or reading an article about quantum mechanics naturally harbors both of these impulses within themselves.
We all have a primal desire to believe in the extraordinary, to feel that the universe is magical and vast.
And we all have a protective instinct to doubt, to question, and to ensure we aren't being deceived.
I know when I first heard the holographic theory, my brain immediately split into those two camps.
I think everyone's does.
Half of my brain was like, wow, the Matrix is real. What does this mean for consciousness? And the other half of my brain was like, wait, my desk feels pretty solid. This sounds like a sci-fi pitch.
Exactly. So by externalizing those two internal voices into the believer and the skeptic, the dialogue validates the listener's internal conflict.
When the believer speaks, the listener's own sense of wonder feels represented.
And when the skeptic demands a test, the listener's own doubt is validated. The listener doesn't feel like they're being talked down to from an ivory tower. They feel like their own internal monologue is playing out in real time in the external arena.
So what does this all mean for you? You, the listener, navigating a world where the volume and complexity of information are constantly accelerating.
Well, what we see in this source text is the ultimate shortcut to becoming genuinely well-informed.
Because you aren't just receiving a raw data dump. A data dump is static. A data dump is the physicist reading equations.
What you get with this dynamic is the opportunity to watch the data be stress-tested in real time.
It's the difference between being handed a sword and watching a sword being forged.
Yes. You watch the believer heat the idea up in the forge of imagination, stretching it to see how far it can bend.
And then you watch the skeptic strike it with the hammer of empirical rigor to see if it shatters or holds its edge.
You get to witness the idea survive the gauntlet.
Because you are witnessing the actual process of understanding, rather than just being handed the final polished result. It respects your intelligence.
It invites you to be the silent third partner in the dialogue, weighing the arguments, observing the sparks fly, and coming to your own synthesis.
This method paces the intake of disruptive information too.
It really does. If you hit someone with the reality-breaking nature of the holographic universe without warning, their cognitive defenses will instantly reject it.
But if you walk them through the intuitive wonder and the rigorous doubt simultaneously, they can digest it.
It turns learning from a spectator sport into an active, participatory exercise in critical thinking.
As we wrap up our exploration today, we've journeyed through some incredibly dense territory.
We really have.
We started at the edge of a black hole, wrestling with the mathematics of a two-dimensional universe, but we ended up mapping the human mind.
We saw how the holographic universe, a dialogue of belief and skepticism, uses a brilliant, necessary dichotomy.
It harnesses the believer's vital ability to suspend disbelief and say, "This makes sense," acting as the theoretical scout.
And it balances that perfectly with the skeptic's rigorous, unyielding demand for evidence, the vital anchor that insists, how do we test this?
We saw that the true power of scientific and intellectual progress isn't found in one side dominating the other, but in their genuine, ego-less collaboration.
A collaboration that ultimately breaks down the walls of the ivory tower and invites the audience directly into the arena.
Because the dynamic outlined in this text isn't just a strategy for processing quantum mechanics or cosmic hologram.
No, it's a highly practical blueprint for how you can approach any complex, overwhelming reality.
You are absolutely allowed to be excited by new ideas. You are allowed to look at the stars and let your imagination run wild.
But you are equally obligated to shine the flashlight on the ground and demand the receipts.
You need both the engine of wonder and the brakes of evidence to navigate the modern world successfully.
It has been a profound pleasure analyzing the mechanics of this dialogue and looking at the very architecture of how we think.
And I loved going on this deep dive alongside you, the listener. It's always a privilege to stretch our minds together.
Absolutely.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to mull over on your own. We talked about how we all have a default setting.
We do.
So the next time you encounter a paradigm-shifting idea, whether it's an article about a new dimension in physics or a technological breakthrough that promises to reshape society, pay close attention to which voice speaks up first in your head.
Is it the believer leaning into the wonder?
Or is it the skeptic immediately demanding the evidence?
Yeah.
And more importantly, once that first voice speaks, how quickly can you consciously invite that other voice to join the conversation?